I'm going to give you kind of an overview of our life in the 70s, which I thought might be the best way to introduce some of these furniture concepts and how they came about, and a little bit of the construction techniques too, because that's interesting maybe for people to see how they came together. So here's a brief family history. It starts with the world, of course, and the people who travel know that the world is available. So for me, it started in Chicago. I was born and raised in Chicago, and I went to university in Chicago and got my Bachelor of Science degree from the Institute of Design and in industrial design. And when I was a senior student there, I became very interested in clean, modern furniture design. And at the time, in the 70s, the best clean and modern furniture you could find was in Scandinavia. So I got the idea, well, I'll fill out a Fulbright form to go to Sweden to study furniture design. And I did that, not really expecting that I would get the Fulbright, but sure enough, I got the Fulbright. And next thing you know, we have to go to Stockholm for a year to study furniture. At that time, Sarah and I were dating. Sarah says, "You can't go to Sweden without me." So we instead got married. Got married in August, and right away, a few weeks later, we're on the boat to Stockholm. So there's the first leg of our trip in our lives. In Stockholm, I was at Kunstfagskolan, and for a period of time working with third-year students, and a visitor came. And this visitor, everyone was talking about, his name was Victor Papanek. Oh, American designer, you must know the guy. And I said, no, I've never heard of him before in my life. And the reason, of course, being that I was more of a West Coast guy and a Midwest guy, but Victor was an East Coast guy from Purdue. And so I said, I'm looking forward to this. And eventually there was a lot of activity in the hallway. Oh, Victor Papanek is here. You have to see this guy. And the door opens up, and there's Victor, and he's dressed in black leather from head to foot. Black leather pants, black leather jacket, black shirt, with nickel-plated hardware. And I said, oh boy, this guy looks like he just got off of a Harley. But it was an interesting introduction for us. We had an amazing 2 weeks together and thought probably we would never see each other again. However, the trip took me to Los Angeles, California Institute of the Arts, where I was lucky enough to get a teaching assistantship. And lo and behold, there's Victor Papanek. So that started a lifelong friendship with this great designer. And it was at Cal Arts that we began to notice that we weren't alone when it came to being nomadic. All the students, most of the faculty, everyone had these really ingenious ideas for designs and solutions for being mobile and being portable. And we decided to do the book. So during a summer session of 10 weeks long, we embarked in 1973 and then later in 74 on Nomadic Furniture 1 and 2. We got tired of, well, Sarah and I are from the Midwest, so we said, oh, this California weather is driving us crazy. It's too consistent, and the temperature is always 22 or something. So we said, no, this is not for us. We have to go to a place where there's seasons. So I took a job at Rochester, New York, in Rochester Institute of Technology. And it was a wonderful job. The people I worked with were great. The students were great. But after 5 years, Sarah looked at me and I looked at her and we said, we can't stand this place. The weather is terrible. It's too cold. The snow is twice as high as me. So we have to go to a better climate somewhere. And I was able to get a job in the head of the department at the University of Washington in Seattle. And that started a much longer period of time. In Seattle, I did a number of things. I was just beginning to get into computers in design and built my first computer, because that's the only way you could get one back then. It was called an OSI Superboard, and it came with 4K of memory, and if you spent the money, you could enlarge it to 8K. But I still have that computer, and it's one of these things that I hold dear to me, and it's traveled with me in a nomadic sense ever since. After Seattle, and that was a long period of time, about 10 years, I got the opportunity to do research and teaching at the school in the Netherlands. So I went to Delft, to the Technical Institute, and began working there as a professor with a research group doing tools for designers, mostly computer-based tools, and also I had a teaching group that taught interaction design and things more or less computer-related. So you see I began to shift away from furniture design. And then finally, after retiring, where do we end up? All the way back across the world to the Seattle area, to an island called Orcas Island, part of the San Juan Islands in the Northwest. And that's where we are now, my retirement place. And so our nomadic travels are, I think, ending, but I'm not sure. I thought this would be interesting to show you. These are old slides, some of them not very good, of our environment, how we lived back in the 70s. This was our first living room in Burbank, California. And you can see some artifacts there, I hope you can see them, that might be of interest. There's what we call the Doug Scheffler Dancer's Chair. It's a rocking chair. I'll show you some more pictures of that later. There's naturally the inflatable chair that's there, and as many artifacts as we could find to hang up on the walls to dress the place up a little. The usual bookshelf made of boards and bricks. And on the other side of the room, a recycled couch, and some more pictures. Harlan is surprisingly looking at something. Another inflatable chair, a recycled crib, because by this time we had Michael, who's sitting back there now. And you see things like Coca-Cola cases, from the old bottled Cokes, and they also made great storage. This was anything you could find and adapt and use. That's how we lived, because that's the only things we could afford. In the bedroom area here, you see a real obvious thing. The desk is a door. It's supported by 2 travel trunks that we took to Sweden and back. The bed is a door as well. And about the only artifact in there that's not secondhand is the Olivetti typewriter, which as a designer I couldn't resist buying, but that's the Valentine. And here is Michael's room with Michael in it. And again, we all slept on doors, and we had cubes, and just kind of lived that way because it was the easiest stuff to get and to move. Now this also, I'm sure Harlan will recognize. This is a door, and it's spread out on top of some cardboard tubes, which are held with tape. And that was the support for it. Again, materials easily found and adapted. And in front of it is a recycled office chair that Harlan actually fixed up, painted red, and put a Marimekko fabric on it. And we used this kind of setup for years. And the ubiquitous Luxo lamp that everybody had back then. Continuing along with that same table, there was a television station in Los Angeles that did an interview with me, and we talked about that table, and above my head is the very well-known styrofoam cup lamp, which became something of an icon. I've seen it republished and reprinted just about everywhere, and it still is a wonderful solution, very inexpensive to make, and has a beautiful lighting effect. And then I began to kind of embark on this idea of one sheet of plywood as a construction method. And the very first thing I did was to lay this out, which is a little dining room table and stools. We had no place to eat, so we had to make something. And here it is in our first apartment. This was just cut out with a saber saw, the only tool I could afford at the time, and bolted together with some brackets and things. And Sarah did a wonderful job making covers for the stools. Later you can see in another room the same chair, and of course the Danish type of lamps that we still use today, in fact. Later I began developing a little more interesting technique. This is a workbench, and the beauty of the workbench is, again, the same tool, saber saw, cut out of one sheet, but the advantage was that there's no glue or fasteners whatsoever. The whole unit slides together, slots together, and locks. And the real piece looked like this. I had some extra Formica laminate, and I was able to make a top for it. Piping of all kinds, pipes and fasteners, plastic pipes, metal pipes, a wonderful resource for building all kinds of furniture. And you see here this little end table, and I'm going to move into lamps and show you how that might have embodied itself in some lamp design as well. So now we have the same little end table next to our bed, and the lamp that you see there is made out of a soup can, and the disc that you see on top is held by a magnet so that the spot coming up from the lamp reflects off of the disc, and the disc can be rotated with the magnet to any direction. So it was our first kind of task lighting. This little desk lamp, again, a composite of things, cardboard tubes, a half round of a plumbing pipe, and then covered with mylar. So we used mylar a lot because it had a real reflective quality of chrome that we couldn't get any other way. And another view of it taken apart. And also here's a plumbing fixture, again a pipe fitting, and it was just ideal to put a small globe lamp into. We were inspired by a number of things, especially by modern designers. Some of you may recognize this lamp by Joe Colombo. And we liked the way that this lamp could be tilted. So we came up with the idea of doing a similar lamp with two different globes. The top one is actually a bulb, the bottom one is a glass globe. And inside the glass globe, we put sand so that the lamp could be tilted at any angle. And then this, I did this because being inspired, just doing this presentation and organizing the slides, I thought, you know, the old guy still has some tricks up his sleeve. I found this lamp from Marco Zito in a design magazine, and I was very inspired by it. I looked at it and I said, you know, that lamp looks like a 3-ring folder, like a 3-ring binder. And I said, I bet I could do something with that. So I got a 3-ring binder, and I cut out a form, and I put the lamp across the 3 rings, and ended up with what I call the tria. His was the tua, and this is the 3-ring binder, so it must be the tria. And there you go, it gives you an idea. So there's still, you know, Nomadics is still everywhere, whatever you can find. Joe Colombo also inspired us. This was often in the way that we worked. Victor, who is much more widely read than me, would find design magazines constantly. I think he subscribed to 20 at a time or something. So he would come in with an image like this from Colombo's flash lamp, and he'd say, this is really a cool lamp. Is there anything we can do to make a lamp like this and put it in Nomadic? And I'd look at the shape, and not so much the stand and everything, but I'd look at the basic shape and I'd say, you know, kind of reminds me of a milk bottle. So here's a typical American milk bottle. That's called a gallon jug. And by cutting along the dotted line, you make a kind of a shade, and you turn that into a lamp like that. That's in Nomadic. Director's chair, also a standby. Beautiful pillow by Harlan on the director's chair, thank you. And the lamp construction is chrome tubing from the plumbing store held together by drawer knobs. So by using a clamp system of drawer knobs and wing nuts, we got the lamp to work. Recycling, like we recycled the milk bottles, recycling was also a big issue too. So here's something like an old army cot that had a horrible bad cover on it, which we completely redid and made a new kind of product out of it. And like I say, even better than the original, probably. That was me, by the way. Yeah. And I was surprised to find here at the hotel, so this is very current, we're at the Daniel, and by gosh, if they haven't got recycled stuff at the hotel. There's a stool made out of a stack of newspapers with some belts around it, and a lamp made out of old plastic bags. And I go, now that's not bad. So someone asked me, you know, what's happening with nomadic furniture and with do-it-yourself in America? And I said, not much. And I said, what it appears to me is that there's more interest in it, and maybe you're in the forefront here in Vienna, in Austria. So you can pat yourselves on the back for that. The Aframe table is a little different now. This was the red chair that you see in front of it was from Yugoslavia, and it was the first kind of flat folding chair I had seen. Probably you're familiar with it now. And I thought we could do a table like that. And so with that as an inspiration, we made this Aframe table. It's a little more involved in terms of construction than a lot of our other projects, but the results are so nice, and the two work together so nicely. And I think the interesting thing about it is when you fold the table flat, it is 3 centimeters thick. So storage is pretty easy. This design is in the slideshow, and somebody told me that people are more interested in the baby than they are in the design. But it's a little crib, uses a technique of posts and plugs. So the first rod comes in, the second rod locks that rod in place, and the plug locks the second rod in place. So the whole system becomes very rigid, and it's very easy to take apart into pieces. And we suggested this in Nomadic 1 and a whole series of additional designs in Nomadic 2. So it's the only product that really continued from the one book to the next. That's kind of how the system worked. Now, Doug Scheffler was a student, so we used a lot of good ideas from students. And he developed this dancer's chair, and the idea was that you could lay back in this chair, it would get your feet up above your head, and it would be exceedingly comfortable over a long period of time. And for dancers, that was important because they were on their feet dancing all the time. They needed to be able to do a quick relaxation. But we found everybody liked the chair, and Doug figured out a way to make it very easily using some masonite and some plywood and some finger foam, and we all built these things. And so that's Sarah there, sitting in the chair, and another view of her leaning back. All you had to do was raise your arms and the chair would tilt back. In the very back, maybe you can see from Nomadic 2, it's on the cover, the little playhouse that we built for Mike. And the TwoWay Chair, which kind of is an interesting concept. In this position, the chair is high enough to use for a desk or for dining. And if you rotate it around to the other side, there we go. It's low enough to use for lounging and relaxing. Now this looks kind of heavy, but because pieces could be cut out of it if one wanted to. But we liked it just the way it was, so that's the way we used it. And what I found interesting is that this has been modified and used by a number of people. The concept of the two-way is interesting, but the materials have changed over the years. And so here's a chair from Sean Michael Reagan. He's the guy who heads the blog for Make magazine. And he sent me this, and he said, this chair, which is in honor of the TwoWay Chair, is made from old signs. So they have these plastic material, which is cellular. It has gaps in it that you see for a lot of signage. And when the signs aren't used anymore, you cut them up and fit them together, and you make a TwoWay Chair out of it. So here was our living room, how we lived in the 70s. And now you see this kind of mix of things together. The TwoWay chairs, the bottle lamp, a lot of cubes because they were very practical for storing and for carrying things when you moved. And all of that leading itself to this series of books. Now the last thing I want to talk about is this photograph. This appears at the end of Nomadic Furniture 1. It shows Vic and I on some wheeled skateboard-like things with all kinds of household belongings. And when we had the picture taken by a student, it was probably the only picture not taken by my wife Sarah, actually, for the books, but the student took the picture and we said, you know, if you move the camera just a little bit, you'll get a blur and it'll make it look like we're moving. So the student said, okay, and he takes the picture, he said, perfect. We get it back and we look, guess what, he moved the camera the wrong way and it looks like we're going backwards. So, in some ways I found this incredibly appropriate for today because we have gone backwards. We're here in Nomadic Furniture 3 talking about all this wonderful new technology and new experimentation, and yet we're talking about something that happened 40 years ago when we started it, so it's still going strong. In any case, I thank all of you. That's a little introduction that I thought you might enjoy.
The first question I really have is, it's really interesting, fantastic to open with the picture of your own nomadic travels, because it seems to me you have this unique combination of European and US design influence during the 1970s. And I wonder if you could elaborate on the relationship between Scandinavia, your position there, and then moving over to Cal Arts. Did Scandinavia have a big influence on you and Papanek?
Well, you can see, of course, that I was always interested in the simplicity of the Scandinavian furniture, and at the time, everything else in America was all stuffed and not as clean looking, and also natural woods, which we responded to. Materials were nice. There was all kinds of really great fasteners coming out of Europe at the time, and I'm still interested in the different fastening devices. So that, I think, is what inspired me mostly, and probably had a direct influence in Nomadic Furniture and how we produced the pieces and how they looked. So it could also be that that's why we didn't go into a third book, as after a while we felt that we had kind of carried it on as far as we could. But the influence from Sweden to Cal Arts was probably just manifested in Nomadic more than anything else. Because at Cal Arts in the 70s, there was a tremendous amount of experimentation. And everything from geodesic domes were being created, a thing called quick cities where they would set up an entire city in a week and take it back down again. Portability, nomadics became a really big issue. People loved to travel, they wanted to experience the world. These are things our parents didn't really adhere to. I remember often my mom would say, you know, well, why do you want to go to Europe? I mean, we haven't seen all of the United States yet. And I go, well, that's okay. I think I could get more benefit from going to Europe. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we enjoyed very much the experience of being in Europe. Our firstborn was born in Europe, in Stockholm. Going through that procedure of maternity and childbirth in a foreign country was interesting enough, I think. But yet one of our most treasured experiences, maybe even more so than the children we had later. So Sweden was a big influence in our lives.
And what about the politics? Because in 1970 you've got at Aspen Design Conference this incredible uprising by students and the so-called French group that critique the consumer culture of corporate American design. Was nomadic furniture a response to that design activism, or was it more a lifestyle?
I think it was more lifestyle. In the design school at CalArts, a number of movements cropped up. The one that Dick Farson was most interested in was social design. And they felt that things could be changed through design on a social level. And indeed, that there's some element of truth to all that. Whereas I think Vic and I were looked at as more product designers and maybe even for profit, I hate to say, but that's true. And at the same time, within our department, there was a lot of radical design. There was a lot of anti-war protesting because we were all involved in the Vietnam War at that time, and against it, by the way, almost all of us uniformly. And the women's movement came up at that time. So there was a tremendous interest in this diversity, all of which had a kind of a design underpinning. And that's what made CalArts a real mixing pot socially.
It's an interesting point about the women in design and the beginning of this kind of movement at CalArts, but I was struck by also your intimate kind of family photographs about the gender relation, that it seems that some of the ideas come from just everyday domestic experience, and indeed Papanek's, Victor's wife, Harlene, contributing to some ideas, and Sarah, your wife, and also the photographer in Nomadic.
Yes.
And I wondered how that kind of daily life, children, domesticity really influenced nomadic furniture design.
Oh, okay. We lived it. So, in a sense, I mentioned in the opening that it wasn't so much by choice, it was by necessity that we lived a nomadic lifestyle, that we had to surround ourselves with things that could easily move and be portable. And we were a team, too. So I think Victor and I both felt that our wives were very integral parts of the design process. And our children then became part of that, too. We didn't go anywhere after Michael was born without Michael. We'd put him in the car and drive him around the block till he fell asleep, and then we'd go into the party, put him on the bed along with all the coats. And he was really a part of us, and we carried him with us everywhere. So socially and lifestyle-wise, it was a real family experience.
But it sounds like a very different kind of family life, and some academics have talked about this period as the kind of loosening up of lifestyle. And how much was it also a response to the idea of the domestic interior and objects as static possessions, that you inherited your family's objects, but this is about kind of non-static objects. It's about radically rethinking what the interior is and what family life is.
Absolutely. We didn't necessarily reflect our parents' values, especially when it came to design and furniture and things like that. I grew up in a very conservative, believe it or not, very conservative household. My parents were conservative people. My mother had a new sofa in the living room that she had covered in plastic so that nobody would make it dirty, even though it seems impractical to me to get a sofa to put people on. But that was the way it was back then, you know. And this mishmash of colored fabrics and strange designs all melting together. I think by going to design school, and of course I got the opposite end of the scale. I got the very Bauhaus-oriented regimen in design school. And between the two, I had to figure out what was going to be something down the middle, and that's probably where I ended up. But that I think explains a little bit. We did not follow our parents' footsteps. We didn't stay in the United States. We traveled a lot. And I must say that Sarah's parents were a little different because they were both artists. Her father is still a well-known sculptor, painter, and her mother was involved in film, especially in art film, and she ran the film library for contemporary films in Evanston. So there was always something artistic going on there, and I would rather spend time at her house watching films and being involved in art than in my house, which had nothing going on really, other than TV, sitcoms. And much to Sarah's dismay, because we'd sit around the house there watching the movies, and I never took her out anywhere, so she was disappointed with that. But, okay.
Just one last thing, and then maybe we should open up for some questions. Okay. But I was really struck by seeing the Olivetti typewriter, because at the same time, in New York at MoMA, there's Italy, the New Domestic Landscape, which is also a kind of watershed as a design exhibit, because on the one hand, you've got these beautiful, glamorous consumer Italian objects, and on the other, you've got some real radical anti-materialist interventions. And I'm really, were you really designing sort of designerly but anti-corporate objects, anti-capitalist objects in a way? Or, you know, were they somehow provoking the idea of an alternative economy of design that wasn't just about making money and glossy objects?
Yeah, I think so, because we didn't try to make money producing nomadic furniture designs and selling them. We made the book to use as a kind of a handbook, advice and suggestions, and hoped that people would take it on themselves to make the products and do the designs, which many people did, I guess. And we were very happy about that. And we weren't so interested, although there were a number of spin-off companies. I'm thinking of Huddle, Housing and Urban Development, the people that made furniture out of large cardboard tubes. They're featured in one of the books. And they were very successful just doing that as a business. But it never appealed to us to try to make money out of it. Interesting about the Olivetti typewriter, by the way, we bought that in Sweden. It was the one thing I think that we really loved and bought and brought home. It had the Swedish keyboard layout, which made it a little bit tricky to use. And eventually, when I got to Rochester, the wife of the head of the department was Swedish, and we gave her that typewriter, and she was more than happy that she could now write letters back home with the correct letter forms. But not being able to live without it, I ran out and bought another one, a real one. So we have another one again.
Very simple question.
Yeah.
What is your attitude towards IKEA?
Oh, well. I can tell you that we have bought IKEA things and we use them. I remember before IKEA even came out, there was a company in Seattle called Sova. We were very interested in what they had to offer. I'm trying to remember about the year, but I can't. It was when we first got there, so it must have been 1980 or so. I know that IKEA is older than that, but in Seattle there wasn't an IKEA yet. But Sova did not survive very long. I think it closed down in about a year. There was no interest in it. And then a few years later, IKEA comes around, and now there is an interest in it. I found that to be socially interesting. Now, the IKEA product, it's an interesting concept. It's nice that you can buy a piece, and there's some, it used to be that if you did it yourself, there'd be satisfaction in building the piece. But now lately, building an IKEA thing is more frustrating than satisfying. And then I've noticed, unfortunately, because the dollar is an important issue, the bottom line, I've noticed a gradual decline in the quality of the IKEA product. And it's unfortunate, but I think that it's necessary based on their motive, their goal. But originally, when you bought an IKEA product, it might be plywood with a wood veneer on the side. And then in some years, the plywood turned into a particle board with some wood veneer on the side. And now, if you buy it, it's particle board with a plastic wood-looking veneer on the side. And all of that in order to keep the price concept low. So, and most of the time, these things don't last very long. People have trouble putting them together. They try really, really hard to make it work. But I think that there's room for better quality there somewhere.
Thank you very much, Jim,
Yes.
for this wonderful presentation that you gave us. Being a professor at the Design University in the United States myself, I wonder how you feel about the sustainability and do-it-yourself furniture, what is happening on the West Coast as opposed to the East Coast. Because frankly, on the East Coast, I see a lot of interest among the students in sustainable materials, sustainable design, but not so much do-it-yourself furniture. So this is kind of
interesting.
surprising for me. I don't know how it is on the West Coast in your neighborhood.
Yeah, well, in some ways I find the two go together because if you want to be sustainable and you want to recycle, sometimes you have to find the materials and build the product yourself for that to happen. So, like I mentioned earlier, I think the movement of DIY isn't so prevalent yet. I don't know how it is on the East Coast, but it isn't so prevalent where I am. Not yet. I'm hoping that it'll pick up again. But there seems to be much more going on here and in Europe than there is in the States.
I think so too. Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of interest in kind of ecologically responsible materials, but they could be marble as well as precious metal or something. So I see almost a return to a design that works with true and honest material in the Bauhausian sense, but not so much in a do-it-yourself sense.
Yeah,
So the designers claim still the authority of creating their designs and then selling them at a high price.
No, I think you're right. There's actually a kind of a differentiation there because this belief in natural materials and in, I mean, there's nothing wrong with marble. There's nothing wrong with gold or any kind of natural material. There's an expense involved, but it isn't necessarily do-it-yourself type of materials.
No, not at all.
So, and that's probably why they're still running on a separate track.
Yeah.
But there's still a great interest, you're right, in sustainability and in things that are not going to fight nature when you produce them.
Right. I mean, it's also interesting, I mean, if I may tie your question together to my question, that in the latest IKEA development, IKEA encourages the clients to what we call hack into IKEA furniture, to alter IKEA furniture and to customize themselves, which I think is also a very, very interesting development on the IKEA track.
Yeah, there's that wonderful film here in the back of the exhibit of IKEA mashing or whatever you call that.
Yeah.
The technique of taking 2 or 3 different IKEA kits and building something entirely new out of it. And there are websites devoted to that, and some incredibly creative products are coming out of that.
Right.
So, but that's just design and invention, the usual thing you usually find. But,
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I add something on this? I mean, I lived for 15 years abroad, and in every city, basically, where I lived, there was IKEA. Yeah. But in America, in New York, where there are several IKEAs, my impression was always 80% of the people you saw there were either Hispanic or Afro-American, but not usually the normal Americans, you know. And this is interesting, and I have no explanation for that. Whereas when you go in Germany or wherever, it's the normal thing. You see the kind of full population represented there. So this is this the same, you think, on the West Coast?
I think IKEA is looked at as an inexpensive alternative, and so you'll find a fair number of people with low income shopping there. In Seattle, though, we also see, like you do, middle income people as well, happily buying things there. Young couples especially, and again, because they can't afford very much, and the economy is such that people are not really wealthy. So it is still a very successful business as far as filling up your house with the furniture that you need. But the high-end people, no, they're going to go somewhere else and have custom-made things done and stuff like that. I think in Delft, where I taught for 11 years, that's also one of their key stores. In fact, I think it's now the business center for IKEA. And they moved it out of Sweden for tax reasons. But it's in Delft now, and that store is also very, very good. It seems to be attracting people of almost all income levels. And I don't know if that's because it's because it's inexpensive or because it's kind of kitsch. You know, that's some things are just kind of interesting to have, especially some of the housewares and goods that are not necessarily assembled, not furniture per se, but some accessories. But it continues to be a very viable enterprise. Yeah.
I can observe that I've lived 24 years, meaning slightly more than half my life, in countries where there is no IKEA. And actually, but it is produced in those places.
Countries, yeah.
Though now Lithuania doesn't produce, it manages production in Belarus and the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So it's used as the middleman. But it just means you do something else. So second-hand becomes viable.
Yeah.
So when my family shifted to Australia, though IKEA is now in Australia, a five-star hotel was having a major renovation, and they had a whole, I mean, there was shipping containers with furniture coming, but my parents just went to a five-star hotel on a fire sale auction and bought stuff next to nothing. And last time I shifted continents, I just went to a second-hand store and slapped down $100, you know.
Right.
So it means second-hand has a life, has nothing to do with design, actually. Just has to do with price.
Price and, well...
And if you're a bachelor, you don't really care.
No.
You know.
Sometimes...
Even though maybe I should in my position, but you just...
You should care. But anyway, I'm sure you found some really nice things. We love secondhand stores, and if you search around, you can find some incredible things there, including design classics if you know what you're looking for. It's amazing. On the island, we live on an island of only 3,000 people. And on this island, there's a thing called the Exchange. The Exchange is literally kind of like a large secondhand store, but if anyone has something they don't need anymore, they don't want to throw it away because it still has utility, it's still working, they bring it to the Exchange, which is adjacent, by the way, to the garbage dump. And they drop it off at the Exchange. And if you go to the Exchange to look for something, you can either bring something and exchange it for something else, therefore no cost, or you can pay whatever you like for the item. And this has been the most fantastic resource for us. I think rather than, because there's no IKEA on the island either, and the IKEA we have is so far away from us that it takes a whole day to get there. So most of our latest acquisitions and most interesting things we've gotten from this Exchange. Sadly, a few months ago, the Exchange burned down because somebody was testing a microwave and they put something in it and they got whatever it was exceedingly hot, and then microwave works great, take it away, but they threw this object, whatever it was, in the garbage can. That started a fire and the place burned down after closing time. So they're in the midst of rejuvenating it now. But it's an incredible resource. People miss it like crazy. And I agree with you. I think secondhand is also a super way. I mean, we also have a thing called Craigslist. You must have an equivalent here in Vienna, where you can get online and find other people selling used items, and you can find some incredible things that way too. So that's a whole nother network of acquisition for filling up your house with nice things.
Could I just ask perhaps a closing question, which is, how did you move from Nomadic 2 to your final authored book with Victor Papanek, How Things Don't Work?
Oh, gosh. Okay, I don't know if
Is there a relationship between the two? Is it some kind of response to your discoveries in Nomadic Furniture 2?
I think, yeah, there's obviously everything is connected. It's the same two guys. When we were doing Nomadic, and I'm sure Nomadic 2, and we started getting feedback from people, and we would have discussions often about design in general. And a lot of what we talked about didn't really fit the context of Nomadic Furniture, so we would just kind of put it on the shelf. And later we thought we should probably do this idea. I mean, we would always gripe and complain about bad design. That's kind of how it started. And we'd complain about the way something was made or the way that it worked or didn't work. And we thought we should write a book about this again. And it should be about how things don't work. And rather than being just a book of complaints, it should also suggest ways in which things could be improved. So we began to tackle every single aspect of living, the bathroom and you know, the idea of building stuff from kits, and all this came out of the thinking of what doesn't work now and what can be improved. And we created in the book a yin-yang symbol, the one being the kind of negative side and the other being the solution. So does it relate to nomadic furniture? Not directly, but because the discussions started while we were writing that book, then we got inspired, I think, to do the third one. And probably would have done more, but then distance separated us by that time. How Things Don't Work was written over 2 continents. And we had to send audio tapes to each other back and forth. It was a very difficult way to produce a book. It took much longer. And by that time, it was just too difficult, I think, to continue to collaborate, although we talked about it often. Never got further than that book. And then I did the Nomadic Handbook as a continuation, and that's kind of where things came to an end.
I'd like to thank you very much for a great discussion, great insight, amazing images, and thanks very much to the MAC and the Angewandte for organising the talk, and to the curators for a fabulous exhibition. Thanks very much.
I agree. Thank you very much.